Thank you. Thanks so much. I can't tell you what a thrill it is for me to be here at the museum. The first time I came here, it's a Marine thing. When I first walked up the walkway, I started weeping, and I couldn't tell you why, but it was just, it's a Marine thing. And I don't know if it'll ever get any better than this for me to be here. It's a Marine thing. So thanks for coming. I want to talk a little bit about Ride the Thunder. And the subtitle, A Vietnam War Story of Honor and Triumph, because honor and triumph isn't something that often gets associated with the Vietnam War. One of the things that has always frustrated me as a Marine, just as a regular citizen, is that in America today we tend to celebrate things, in my opinion, that aren't very meaningful. We celebrate the cool, the beautiful, the artistic, and the athletic almost as if they're heroic and really meaningful. And in Ride the Thunder, one of my overarching goals, other than to tell the history and to tell the story of 3 American Marine officers who served as advisors to the Vietnamese Marine Corps and 2 Vietnamese Marine officers, was to celebrate things that need to be celebrated. I wanted to celebrate character and courage and bravery and sacrifice. And hopefully, I'm not the only one out there, and people will, it will resonate with the people that read the book, because the men whom I chronicled, and I think they are metaphors for the larger population of men who served in Vietnam, served honorably, they served bravely, they served courageously, they sacrificed mightily, and in most cases they won every battle and they did everything that was asked of them. So it's to them that Ride the Thunder is dedicated. And the main characters, there are really 3 main characters: John Ripley, who passed away this last year, Gerry Turley, who's with us today, and Le Botkin, who at the end of the war was a lieutenant colonel in the Vietnamese Marine Corps. These men are examples of bravery, of different types of bravery in the extreme, but they are metaphors nonetheless for everybody who served honorably. And I'd like to talk about a couple of them in general. John Ripley's story is widely known within the Marine Corps, and John Ripley really was, if there was Marine Corps royalty or someone that was accorded rock star status, John Ripley was that man. And he, of course, is known for his actions at the Dong Ha Bridge on Easter Sunday, 1972, when he blew up the bridge, did something that was absolutely impossible, and yet he did it. One of the interesting notes of people that do heroic things, guys that win the Medal of Honor or win the big football game, is they tend to get trapped in the moment, frozen in that time. And what I wanted to do in telling Ripley's story here was to go beyond what Ripley did at the bridge. What he did was significant. What he did had strategic impact. If Ripley hadn't blown the bridge, the Vietnam War very well might have ended in 1972, because the Vietnamese armor thrust would have crossed the bridge there and likely not have stopped it. But John Ripley was so much more than just blowing up the Dong Ha Bridge. I had the great privilege of meeting with John Ripley's troops at their reunion, Ripley's Raiders, that were famous from his first command as a rifle company commander in 1967. And I attended their reunion 2 years ago in 2007, and along with Chuck Goggin, I was taken by how his men loved and adored him. And these were guys, out of a rifle company that he had at the time, Chuck, 215 guys at full strength, there were not quite 60 men that showed up for a reunion 40 years later. It was March of '07. It was the celebration of their 40 years, this major, major battle they fought in which they became Ripley's Raiders. And I was struck by these men and how giddy they were when they were around their skipper. It was like little boys seeing Santa Claus for the first time. And yet these were not little boys. These were men that had seen every horror in combat, that had come back. And what was nice about seeing these Marines, now civilians, they were still Marines, was that they were disproportionately accomplished in life. They were disproportionately satisfied with what they had done. But to see them around their skipper was unbelievable. And one of the guys, John Solbach, who went on to become an attorney, and I think he's a legislator in the state of Kansas, in querying the Ripley Raider group, his description of his skipper was the one that touched me the most. I asked him, what was special about John Ripley? What did you like best about him? He said, he was a decent man. I said, describe that, please. So he told me of an event when they were out in the hinterlands of northern I-Corps in the middle of nowhere, and one night they had dug in, and just prior to moving into that position, evidently they had buried a bunch of trash. And somewhere in the area was a farm or something, because there were pigs that found the trash and began to scrounge around making noise. Even though it was a couple 100 meters away from their position, the Marines of Lima Company were concerned that this would alert the NVA to their presence. And the Marines in Solbach's position, because Solbach was a mortarman, they wanted to fire a few rounds out, take care of the pigs. Case closed. Well, Ripley said, no, those pigs belong to some farmer. If we kill the pigs, some family may go hungry. We'll deal with them some other way. That, to me, told me more about Ripley than anything else. And this was a man that never backed down from a fight. This guy was Mr. Aggressive. And I hope people will read Ride the Thunder. One of the things that Chuck and John Ripley shared with me prior to his passing was the bayonet charge they led. And I think there's only one other bayonet charge that was actually recorded in Vietnam. So this may be the second one that's actually recorded. And it's a pretty wild story. I'll leave it for you to read that. But Ripley in the book is the example of physical courage in the extreme. Gerry Turley is an example, in my estimation, of moral courage. And Gerry Turley, in a 5-day period, was tasked as a very junior lieutenant colonel with stepping into a situation that he had not been told he was going to take over, but was mentally prepared because he was a Marine officer. He knew what he needed to know, and he stepped into the Super Bowl of his life without really knowing he was going to the Super Bowl, and took over a job and had to fight off 3 divisions plus of North Vietnamese at the same time as he was fighting off a very hostile chain of command in Saigon. And very much in a 5-day period was what I call a Job-like figure. He wasn't affirmed. He was sniped at from every angle, and yet he did what he had to do. And if it weren't for Gerry Turley's leadership during that time frame, it's doubtful that the Americans and their Vietnamese allies would have prevailed, or at least dulled the North Vietnamese offensive. I think what I would hope, if I could pray for things for Gerry Turley or for the story, is that other generations, subsequent generations of Marine officers would study this and learn from his example of moral courage. And then there's my Vietnamese character, Le Ba Binh, and I call his story Enduring Courage, because Le Ba Binh had one tour of duty in Vietnam. His tour of duty lasted 13 years. The only break he had from 1962 to 1975 was the time that he got to spend at basic school here, not very far from where we are right now, for about 8 to 10 months, and that was it. In 1964, right during the Gulf of Tonkin crisis and all that. Other than that, it was combat the whole time. No short-timer calendar, nothing. Le Ba Binh in contact the whole time. And then when they lost the war, and that was after he had been wounded 9 times and been awarded almost everything his country could have given him, 4 American Bronze Stars, and after the war, an American Marine Silver Star, he had 11 years in a re-education camp. And in the first 4 years, his wife didn't know if he was alive or dead. And yet she endured. And another aspect that Gerry Turley reminds me to tell everybody is that what's different about Ride the Thunder is, where possible, we try and include the impact of wives. And for Gerry Turley, had he not had his wife Bunny, and we talk about her a bit in the book, and had John Ripley not had Moline, they would not have been able to accomplish what they did. But Le Ba Binh, had he not had the support of his wife Cam Bon, who remained faithful throughout, who traveled 3 days each way to visit him when he was in re-education camp by train, only so she could have a 20-minute supervised visit with the communist cadres. She stayed faithful to him, and of course they ultimately made it to the United States. And I'm very grateful for that. One of the other things I did want to mention about the Vietnam War that I hope people will take away from this book, I put a presentation together for the California State Military Museum and had an AV thing, and I was thinking about it. And in thinking about the Vietnam War, I wanted to compare it to a time frame that was appropriate. And when Vietnam was going on, the appropriate yardstick was World War II. And when we think about World War II, and I think everybody except young George here, and maybe Zach, are old enough to know that, and maybe you, Donnell, to know that World War II was a war that somehow was a good war, and Vietnam was somehow a bad war. And we remember World War II in all these positive ways. And when you think about the photos, we don't have them here, but I guarantee you know each one. The first one I think of is a picture of the Chinese baby. In 1937, you see that little baby in the rail yard being bombed. And that's a good propaganda picture to get Americans fired up.